at all. So if you have a question for the panelists, I'm going to put in the chat. We're hosting questions on Slido, which is a place to ask questions, basically. And other people can go in and upvote and downvote the questions. Well, I don't know if you can downvote, but you can upvote so that the top questions get asked first. So there is a Slido code in the chat. And also it's a hashtag. If you just go to slido.com, you just put in the hashtag ResBazAZ and that should work. So this is the first time we're using this, so hopefully it works out fine. And now we can get started with the actual panel questions. So the first question we have for each of you is, how do you define data science? What is data science? It's a new field. No one really knows what's going on, but we hope you know what's going on. So if you can define what is data science to you, and how do you kind of define this really diffuse field that's quite young in nature? I'll ask first to, let's go backwards. So Kwang-Sun.
Sure. Yeah, I guess data science is a buzzword that covers a lot of different meanings, and you can have spend hours just discussing how you define it. But yeah, I guess broadly speaking, it's anywhere from simply computing statistics from your data to finding models to understand some mechanism and causality behind, and to the more general sort of software work where you want to build a model that can automatically predict or detect events and the kind of fancy stuff. And I hear this word often that people say a data scientist is someone who is better at statistics than any software engineer and better at software engineering than any statisticians. So yeah, it's a combination of many fields, definitely. And yeah, I think that's how I would personally define.
Perfect. Thank you, Kwang-Sun. Malika, do you agree?
I do agree. And it's interesting because we in the Data Science Institute, we really focus on the collaborative nature and trying to keep tabs on everything that is changing and improving is impossible for any one person or even any one field to do. So we focus very much on the collaborative nature of data science and really needing a team of experts who can contribute. And that involves all the areas Kwang-Sun was just naming: computer science, math, statistics, information sciences, engineering, subject expertise. I mean, you can't get anywhere without having the subject expert in the room, no matter where you're trying to apply data science and machine learning. So to me, it's more about that collaborative science and the collaboration aspects. And then of course, from there, you start moving into what are the appropriate approaches and techniques to apply.
Thank you, Malika. Vignesh?
To me, I think data science, doing science, I feel that data science is not a field by itself. As Kwang mentioned, it's more of a methodology that brought together foundational disciplines. And I agree with Malika that it's a mixture of, I think the most common definition that we've seen everywhere is the Venn diagram of bringing the statistics, the computing, and the key part that Malika highlighted is the domain expertise. I think domain expertise is what differentiates how we do things in different fields. The way people in entomology versus humanities versus social sciences, everybody does or they work with data, but what differentiates all of them is the domain expertise they bring together. So, but again, and to me, I see science field or a discipline, but rather a way of doing things or a way of doing science.
That's really cool. And I like that everyone's answers are so kind of complimentary. Elise, what do you have to add or repeat? It's fine.
Yeah, it's difficult at the end. Yeah, I think I completely agree. I would probably add that basically it's data science is just a point of view from different from your domain science. And you're just like trying to detach and say like, what can I know more from my data? How can I manage better my data? What can I like learn extra from my data? And like really just switching kind of away from the classic domain approach just to a more data-driven point of view, which is probably more like my point of view because like I'm first a domain scientist and then a data scientist, but I would say that it also should work for most other disciplines where data science is also applied. But yeah, otherwise I agree with everyone.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, how did you all personally arrive at kind of working at the field of data science? I think all of you have very different backgrounds, you know, domain backgrounds versus very statistical backgrounds, you know, whatever it is. Can you share with us how you arrived at the field of data science? Now I'm going to completely mix it up. Let's start with Vignesh, then move on to Malaika.
All right. So my background was and has always been engineering. So almost more than a decade back, I was designing and building and testing systems for assessing very critically ill patients. And I was essentially in a bubble. Trying to build systems that can better assess how injured patients move their upper limbs. So the data that physicians typically use is follow my forefinger, and that's pretty much the assessment that they do to assess if you have an injured brain. So my hypothesis was we need more granular data. If we can collect more data on how you move your forefinger and what fine tasks can you do with your upper limbs, and what coarse tasks can you do with your upper limbs. So I was building hardware systems, I was building software, I was trying to generate more data on how to quantify these fine movements. And had an initial prototype of the system. I was collecting data from patients, and life was good. And then I was working in a very interdisciplinary clinicians, engineers, basic scientists. And then the clinicians came and said, well, what you're doing is great, but that's not sufficient. Well, here's what I usually collect from my patients. I think you need to integrate all of this. And then the basic scientists came and said, well, that's great, but that's not how the brain actually functions, or that's not how the injured brain actually functions. This is how you need to quantify. And he gave me another data source to integrate. And then 1 year into the project, I had 5 different data sources to integrate, and I had no idea how to make all of the systems talk, all of those different data sources talk. Some of them are structured, some of them are unstructured. Some of them I've never worked with or seen in my life before. So, and then I got some training in informatics, which is, I think, a more formalized name for data science. And I spent maybe close to 2 years trying to understand how in healthcare and biomedicine, how different systems talk to each other, what is the culture and the standard in healthcare. So essentially, I got some training in the domain of healthcare, and also some technical skills. So that's how I got into the field of data science, or more specifically, biomedical data science. And then today I work at the intersection of 3 things. So people, health information, and technology. And then I built a career at the intersection of those 3 things. And I want to go back a little bit to Kelsey's first question on what is data science, and highlight what Malaika mentioned about collaboration. I think it's really the intersection and the cross-pollination of of the three buckets. To me, the three bins or buckets is people, health, information, and technology. For other people, the three bins could be biology, technology, and something else. For another person, it could be statistics, entomology, and communication. So I think bringing those three things, whatever those three things are, is what defines you as a person working with data. So that's also my story.
It's a super interesting history, Vignesh. I haven't heard that before, so it's great. Malika. And then after that, we'll go with Kwangsun and then Elise again.
So I had a very, very different path coming into data science. So I've been at the university for way more years than I want to count. So somewhere in the range of, I think I'm approaching 25 to 27 years. When I came in from the library and information sciences side, way before there was data science as a known concept. And my work in those areas varied over the years, but always ended up centering around what were called digital library projects at the time. And so everything from digital teaching applications in engineering, all the way through to digital libraries. And then more recently, actually working with Google as part of the and HathiTrust as part of their Google book scanning projects. Few people know that University of Arizona served as one of the test beds for the Google scanning for very specific document types. So we were looking at technical reports, government issued technical reports that were issued many years ago. Very difficult to identify what a technical report is or was, also very difficult to scan because of the way they were printed and the way they are labeled. So a lot of the automated metadata creation, a lot of the automated tools that Google had produced as part of their Google book scanning project did not work correctly on these materials. So we worked with them for a number of years to actually improve that system. And at the same time, we were running a national project to help make these items more discoverable from a metadata standpoint and working that way. Fast forward several years, my collaborative work in that area transformed, and I ended up working out of the provost office on a system that they were running. And in particular, what was happening, aside from trying to work on the software engineering side and how do we get this up and off the ground, there was a lot of data cleanup and transformation that needed to happen on a number of the university data sets. And so I spent close to 7 years digging into our university data and looking at different data feeds, different data sets, identifying errors, helping come up with solutions on how to fix those. And I was very lucky because rather than my having to do it myself, I had a team that worked with me, and I had some amazing developers and software engineers who could actually help do the day-to-day data work and cleanup, but very much a collaborative effort. So I come from that collaboration side of things. Long story short, as universities change and positions move around, it was time for me to exit working with the provost office. And I was lucky enough to meet Nirav, and it was suggested that we should have some conversations around data science. And sure enough, I'm now sitting in the Data Science Institute, and so I can pick up that collaborative work with a whole new set of objectives, which is really fun.
That's super interesting. Kwangsun.
Okay, so I was a computer science undergrad major, and I dreamed of developing AI, artificial intelligence. I liked that idea, and then I followed the route. But at the time, machine learning was getting popular. I liked it because it's more specific, and there's this very specific measure on the model performance, and I thought that was more specific, and I felt like that's gonna be useful at some point. So I started my graduate school PhD program in 2009 from University of Wisconsin. And yeah, I initially spent, so first 2 years was like, I worked on something and no result came out, no publication. It was a topic called semi-supervised learning, based on which my advisor back then became popular. But that field was dying away from the main sort of machine learning conferences. So then like my advisor started to shoveling around. I become the shovel, and we spent a lot of time looking into new projects. He was finding very good collaborative projects. One of them was this topic of applying machine learning for cognitive psychology. So they have some models on how brains work by doing certain tasks on patients, brain injured patients. And then there's some, it's a probabilistic model involved, and there's some non-trivial sort of inference method you have to use. And so we developed some of that, and that became like 2/3 of my thesis topic. And then also we were doing some cyberbullying issue. Back then it was a very popular topic in 2013 or so. And we worked on that topic too. And then there was some more things to do there. And so, mainly developing machine learning algorithms for doing these tasks, like detecting and, dealing with and improving understanding on cyberbullying in Twitter. And the analyzing Twitter data was a really nightmare. It's often you can't even read what they're saying. So, and they do the different stuff, like they celebrate half birthday. So they have 2 birthdays a year. Every 6 months you have a half birthday, and that kind of thing. But anyways, yeah, I had some fun doing some collaborative projects. But then I eventually settled on one extra topic for my thesis, which is more sort of a mathematical, but it's sort of an interactive machine learning topic. So it's more like, machine, not just like learning a model from the data that's given. You just imagine a scenario where humans can sort of provide feedback based upon the request of the computer, right? So computers can maybe request some supervision from human by choosing certain informative data points and then asking for intuition or more like data label, that kind of stuff. So I work on those more interactive perspective. And then since then, I was a postdoc, and then I developed more into that topic. So I now work on more what people say theoretical, but I still try to connect that to the real world. And yeah, that's just yeah, I guess how I developed those my research topics so far, and that's how I dealt with data science. And I can maybe share one more thing about this data science. There was this data science for social good program from University of Chicago. I think it's still going on. It was held by Raid Ghani. He was first at University of Chicago. He's now at Carnegie Mellon. And there was like some summer fellowship program where, they recruit students, and then they pay students, but then students are connected to the partners. Partners are in government or city government, nonprofit, that kind of stuff. And then it was a very good chance where I usually just look at the code, but now I get to talk to domain experts. And many times they just have data, they don't know what to do. They don't even know what questions they're trying to ask often. So you have to be very interactive and ask around what you actually want. And so that was a really, really different experience for me. And yeah, it's a much better experience than say going into a company and doing sort of an internship where you just get some small tasks that you just have to code up and stuff. But this was like more like you take responsibility and you build your team, and you have to communicate through identifying the needs and what we can do for them. And it was a really nice sort of experience there. But there are some, so like, right, Ghani is still doing that, so I highly recommend it. And if not, there are some other program. I think at University of Massachusetts, they have some other similar program too. And so I highly recommend it. That's all.
Thank you, Kwon-Sung. I posted a link in the chat to the Data Science for Social Good program. I do want to note it started at one university and now it's at like 6 or 7 universities have, like University of Washington hosts one as well. So it's a cool program that they aren't hosting this year because of COVID again, but it says on their website that they're going to get back to it next summer. All right, Elise, how did you come to data science?
Sure. So basically my training and my PhD is in microbiology. So I'm really coming from like bench lab point of view. And when I started my postdoc at the U of A in the lab of Bonnie Horvitz, we had to deal with like a lot of metagenomes, so microbiome data sets. And one of the projects that I was working on was to try to build a database, an infrastructure that's kind of combined together the ocean, the world's microbiome for the oceans. And like, as Malaika said, like it was really through the collaboration of like trying to build these infrastructures where we kind of need to clean the data, bring the data set together, make sense of the data, and then put them into websites. That really like kind of made me interested in the data science point of view. And then last year, yeah, that was last year, I was a data science fellow at the Data Science Institute, where I really had the opportunity to also meet other people that are data scientists, and like kind of going out of my biologist point of view that was really restricted, and like kind of being more open-minded and like really trying to to bring all the potential of data science into what I could learn and do. So yeah, that was really a super exciting experience, and that I aim really to bring with me in my current position now. But yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so a reminder to everyone, if you have questions for the panelists, to go to sli.do and enter the hashtag. All the information is there in the chat, so you can ask questions of the panelists. Currently, we have only 4, and so I'm going to go on to the last question from the organizers, which is basically either if you were starting off in your journey to arrive at data science again, or you were recommending for other people what they should do now. We have a lot of people here who are really new to the field. What would you recommend they do? What are the skills they should focus on? Should they focus on statistics? Should they focus on computer science, programming? Where should they focus their skills and energy, and how should they get involved? Let's do Vignesh first again. I don't know. That's so hard.
All right. I think that's the hardest question so far, Kelsey. But I can maybe share a few resources. So the first, given that this is an international event, we have people from several other places and institutions. But regardless of where you come from, a go-to resource is the library at your institution. Libraries always have a way of dealing with data and information. They've always been, and they always will in the future. And they've continued to keep up with and provide appropriate resources for different communities. Shout out to the University of Arizona Library, which is an exemplar, and they provide training on different computational tools. They provide training on how to manage data. They build systems for dealing with different data sources. For example, the University of Arizona Library contributed to building the data dashboard for the University of Arizona COVID testing data. So I think every library at every academic institution, or even the public libraries, are home to data and information literacy. And I think that's a great resource. The second resource I would say is our people. And I want to clarify what I mean by people. Part of Kelsey's question was, if you were to go back in time, or what would you do differently if you were to go back a few years in time? So I not have a community or role models around me to share best practices. I did not have a Kelsey or an Austin or a Karen or Malika to share resources or to inspire me. I'm glad they are around me right now, but I did not find or have people at that time. So finding proponents of data and information literacy in your community. Given that I feel that data science is not a field, I don't think we can define what a data science community is. It's different for different people. I think you have to define what your data science community is, depending on which domain you come from. So I think starting out by identifying who are the proponents of data and information literacy, who are role models that you look up to, would be a good place to start. So I know that those are very vague resources, but more specific resources would be, if you're a beginner, I think Carpentries is a great resource. Hopefully one of the helpers or Kelsey would put it in the chat. We have software carpentry, there's library carpentry, and the keyword there is carpentry. Carpentry usually means putting different building blocks together. So software carpentry looks into the basic building blocks of computing and how to work with software. Data carpentry does the same. So I think Carpentries is also a community that's very closely related to ResBazAZ. So I think that's a great resource to start with. So I'll stop there and let my colleagues share what advice and resources they might have.
Thank you, Vignesh. I'm going to go back to Elise and then Kongsun and then Malika to finish this off.
Yeah, I really completely agree with what was said. And I would add that, like, starting from like those types of communities really help you to know, because data science is moving so fast that if you are trying to find resource online, you may look at stuff that are like completely outdated very quickly, even if there are like good resources, good tutorials online. The difficulty is to identify where the field is moving and what are the technologies that you should invest your time on. And that's why those types of communities are so important. And across the list that's on top of the list that was given, I would also add groups like R-Ladies and PyLadies, who are like more tailored to one language, and one type of communities for women in data science. And there is also the Women in Data Science group. They have a conference every year on campus, which is also great for women in data science, as the name implies. So yeah, I really completely agree. I think if I had to come back in time and be more efficient in what I would have learned in data science, I would have definitely, I wish someone had told me, like, find first a group and then don't try to learn completely by yourself. It's not the most efficient way, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Most of my skills are due to the community, so that's great. I can echo those statements. Kongsun.
Yeah, yeah, those are really good points. Yeah, when you have a community, especially from the similar field, that would be really, really helpful. And I just, from computer science major, I can just maybe emphasize on learning programming aspect that, so, you know, it's programming language, it's something like language you learn, and then if you don't use it, then you forget. So I guess people now know what's a good way to learn. and a good way to learn is to do projects. You have to do projects, and you have to first select the project that that you're interested in. But often, like choosing a project can be difficult, and maybe sometimes you don't know what to do, or you don't have the right data set you want to use. But then you always can find some starting point from existing projects that others have shared. And so please start from something that is done, and then now you can take one step at a time on start modifying it towards your needs, and always do one step at a time. Don't make multiple changes and then run it and then it doesn't work and you get frustrated, right? So always just do one change at a time and take your time. But once you've done this experience, then you'll learn a lot, and have a couple of sort of a project you've done and make it well documented. Even do a blog article by yourself and then share it in your personal Twitter, and you can revisit it whenever you get confused. And so yeah, it's really good to have some reference point when when you do start struggling or get confused. You can go back to this example that you worked out that it works. And so I think that's a great way to start. But it's very important to recognize that it is important to do project-based learning for programming.
Awesome. And then ending with Malika.
So I think those were excellent points that the other panelists all put out. My recommendation would be not to get caught up on the concept and the term of data science. I think so often I talk to people or I hear people and they're caught up in how do they be that perfect data unicorn? How do they do it all? How do they do everything? And I go back to my experiences, and while it was not the most straightforward path, I think I learned quite a bit by taking a path where I was working and trying to do data science techniques well before there was a data science label on the field. And I think in the course of that, what I can now appreciate is learning where my strengths and my abilities were and were not. And I could only get there through having these different collaborative experiences at different parts of my career where I am not the person that you want actually writing the code, right? Like that, I just know that. I will always look to have a software engineer or somebody else a computer scientist who is going to do that code. But bring me in on other aspects or the collaboration or bringing everything together to have the whole story. That's where my strength ends up lying. And it took me a really long time to appreciate and be okay with the fact that I was not going to be the top statistician or the top coder or the top person, but rather my collaborative strength of bringing that all together so we could have a successful project was where I was going to be able to do the most good. And I think for people starting out, it's great to do all these, have all these experiences, try all these different projects, do all these different things, but you have to find your strength and then stay practiced. So as Kwang-Sun mentioned, when you find that strength, don't stop coding. I mean, I've been using command line since I was an undergrad in astronomy years and years and years ago. I still feel like a beginner at command line because I don't have to do it day in and day out. And so I will attend all the carpentry sessions just because I need to have those refreshers and see what's coming down the line, because it's no longer my job to do those things day in and day out. And that's okay. It's okay for me to rely on other people who are going to be more practiced, so long as I understand what's happening with the tools, what's happening with the larger concepts, with the project on the whole. So I think the other thing I would say is it's going to be okay to feel like you're a beginner in a lot of areas and ask a lot of questions and use that community, right? So Elise is laughing over there because she's had to help me with different pieces along the way, right? It's okay. Make use of your community and ask the questions. And don't be afraid to say, you know what? I don't really know this, or somebody remind me, or it's been a really long time since I've been in our studio. Like, how does that work again? And how do I do X, Y, and Z? And then once you find that area where you have your passion, where you have your skill set, keep it practiced and keep it sharp and be willing to contribute it and expand from it and explore from it to build your portfolio. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to finish a message really quick. Yeah, I think I can relate to a lot of those as well. One thing I try to tell my community is there's no shame in asking questions. There's never a stupid question because there's so many things that data scientists are trying to do. You're trying to juggle so much. You have to inherently be weaker on some parts and rely on your community. So I think those are all really good sentiments. I'm looking at the Slido and we have some questions coming in. So the first question, and I'm just going to say this question and then whoever wants to answer it is free to answer it. What interesting new advances in data science are you keeping an eye on? Anything new coming out that you are like, oh, this sounds cool, or?
So I'll take a stab because it'll help promote one of the sessions later in ResBaz. In the Data Science Institute, we're always watching for what new data science tools can help people build data pipelines and work with their data in a more collaborative and more efficient way so that we can get more people into the data science space, feeling more comfortable and more enabled rather than having to have a team of software engineers or developers sitting there working with them. So, and as I said that, it's totally leaving my head what the session is that Arden is doing.
There's
ML
two
Flow.
ones. ML Flow, yeah. ML
Oh,
Flow
yeah.
and then Prefect, I think, as well.
Yeah, so ML Flow was the one I was thinking of. So Arden is one of our graduate students, so I'll promote his session. We've had him working and we've been trying to see how tools such as ML Flow, it's just one of, I think, many that are actually sitting out there, can help to enable people to have a more collaborative laboratory experience and data experience with their data pipelines to get them into doing analysis more quickly. So that's one. And then I would be shamed if I didn't say, use Cyverse, go look up Cyverse, figure out how you can use Cyverse with your team.
Any other comments from other panelists on up and coming, what things you're keeping an eye on?
I think one thing that is important to keep an eye on is like technologies that have really like managed to get a community behind, like tools like the Tidyverse in R. Like they really have like a momentum because people are like joining and learning and teaching each other and like building on each other, and that is definitely those types of technologies that I keep an eye on, because like, you know, that they will continue and survive for at least a few years and won't be completely obsolete quickly. So yeah, definitely anything from, I really love the Tidyverse and anything that was built on Tidyverse. So yeah, and I know that there are sessions in the ResBaz on like our dashboard using Shiny, and that is also built on the Tidyverse.
Thank you, Elise. Vignesh, did you have something? You unmuted yourself.
I was going to say to also keep an eye out for developments in every person's domain. For example, I always look for what are developments in data standards in my field, and that's very specific to your subject domain. Standards in healthcare might be very different from what's in entomology versus languages or linguistics. So it keeps growing and changing rapidly. It's something that I keep an eye out. But in general, keeping an eye out for any data science related developments in your community. There might be a team developing common standards or common data elements for a certain domain topic that might be of interest to you. So
that's great.
Okay, I will just add one more, just personal perspective. I'm more on the technology side, I guess. But one thing that I am excited about is this programming language, Julia, that is developing very fast and growing. it's probably not good for most of the audience here, but I'm personally excited about that language that can be a replacement for Python or MATLAB. But that's only my perspective, so that's fine.
There are definitely whispers in the community of Julia, and everyone's like, and for Jason in the chat, it's Julia, like the woman's name. Yeah. People are talking about it, and I don't know Julia, but it seems like it might be the next up and coming thing. We never know. Okay. How do you all see the role or purpose of data science approaches changing in academia in the future? Because all four of you are in academia as data scientists, I guess we could say. How do you see that changing academia's role in society, I guess? I'm trying to read the question. I'll paste it in the chat just in case.
Well, for better or worse, I think it will bring people together and build communities, hopefully. There's also some chatter that the opposite might be true, that people might diverge into their own foundation disciplines. But I think the purpose or the role of data science would be to promote best practices in different domains, build communities in different domain areas, and to break silos between traditional data science disciplines, math, statistics, computer science, versus the rest of the world. So I think it would build more synergies across disciplines.
I'll follow what Vignesh is saying, and I agree 100%. I think what we're going to see is not all that different from other changes you see coming through academia. Tools and techniques and things that maybe we call the core of data science will start to become just good science and good data management. And we will see it become more commonplace and more expected, that our students and the students coming into research labs know these tools and are more familiar, more fluid with them. We're starting to see conversations out of the Data Science Institute with departments and disciplines who have not traditionally been in the data science space, who are trying to come on board. And you see them following similar paths or techniques that disciplines who maybe are more advanced have done, in terms of what is data? What does that mean to our discipline? You know, how do we get a handle on this? And you see that conversation repeating itself. And eventually we'll get to a place where most everybody understands that conversation and then can move into these more advanced techniques. But it will take time in different disciplines. We'll do it at different speeds, and different faculty and research labs will do it at different speeds, depending on how great they are at collaborating and moving forward. So it'll be a long change. It'll take us a number of years for all of academia and for most disciplines to advance and get to a truly collaborative, interoperable data space where they can really make advances on some of their research. But we'll start seeing it becoming more common, and we'll start seeing those expectations that all students are working in GitHub and all students have some awareness of core statistics and use of R or Python or things like that. We'll start seeing that happening in disciplines that traditionally have not had that.
Awesome, thank you very much. Unless we have any more comments on that one, I think the next question I'm going to ask flows quite well, and it'll probably be the last question we do, which is, how do we balance between data-driven analysis and theory-driven analysis or theory-driven research? How do we balance between those kind of two different perspectives of doing research when it's all about data now, isn't it? It is hard, and I see that panelists are recognizing that it's hard.
I can start thinking out loud, and maybe
Yeah.
my friends can help me. So going back to my definition that data science is a way of doing science, there should always be a question or a hypothesis that we go with into our data set. We shouldn't go blind into working with data. So so theories and hypotheses need to be the foundation of doing science. I can see people arguing that, well, then what do you mean by data-driven science? And even for for data-driven projects, we should have some intuition or hypothesis of what we see from a very large data set or whatever data-driven project means. So I think there's more synergies between theory or hypothesis-driven work versus data-driven work. So I'll take the stand that there should always be a hypothesis or a theory that is driving our science or driving our research.
Yeah, I agree, but at the same time, having like those hypotheses and those theory shouldn't bias you, and like having a more data-driven approach and just look at the data and see what are the patterns that you observe can also allow to avoid biases and pitfalls in research. So yeah, the balance between the two is difficult.
So we do have one question on sort of collaboration, which we've talked a lot about on the panel. I'm going to post it in the chat and then read it out loud. So do you collaborate with data science people or prefer to learn things yourself for the problem, as it's difficult to communicate across disciplines? So basically a question about interdisciplinarity, kind of what Malika was talking about. When people have different skills, how do you manage that?
I'll try jumping in because I think I had a very wise mentor when I was an undergrad and grad student who taught me that you should always pick up the phone and talk to the subject expert when trying to figure it out. And then you make the choices as to whether it's something you could do or could learn, whether you need to bring somebody in, but you always start with a conversation to ask and say, I'm not sure I really know what's going on here. Can we just have a conversation and tell me some of the details, the ins and outs, the difficulties, things that I might not be aware of? I think until you've asked, what is it I don't know? You don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know until you have that conversation with somebody who does have more knowledge than you. And so I would always start with a conversation just to at least get the footing and the groundwork and the conversation in the right space, learn the right terminologies, and start moving from there.
And so can I ask you a question? So, but sometimes to have that first conversation, you need to learn the basics to be able to communicate. Like, where do you stop learning stuff just to start that first conversation?
I don't go very far. I simply say, I am not a chemist, or I am not an engineer, or I am not a microbiologist. So give me some background to help me better form these conversations, right? And it kind of goes with the last question. You have some form of question or hypothesis or investigation you're trying to do. So there is no shame, again, in putting it out and saying, here's the direction I'm heading. Here's what I think could happen, but I don't know the right terms, the right words. How do we get started? What should I be aware of? And you'll very quickly come away with a plan. Either you'll have a new collaborator, or you'll know, oh my gosh, I could not communicate with that person, and I need to go back and I need to learn more about, the basics of engineering or the basics of whatever the discipline is, right? You learn very quickly. But if you have the right collaborator with you, talking with you, they're happy to share and point you in the right directions.
great.
And I have to say, I think the Data Science Institute follows that very much. We always have an investigative meeting to kind of put everybody on the same page and say, hey, here's the idea or the thought. What do you think, computer scientist? What do you think, disciplinary scientist? What do you think, image processing person, whatever the case might be? And we all go, has some merit or doesn't have some merit, or, that's kind of interesting. I need to think about that a bit more. So I think that there's no shame in just putting the question out and saying, hey, we need help, or we need to learn how to talk differently. How do I talk with this group?
Yeah, that's a great point. I totally agree with Malaka, and I can share my perspective. I like to do collaborative research. So I talk to many researchers since I came to U of A, and there's always this wall. You gotta break the wall. There's, I talk to, so I have technology, and I'm trying to see if my technology can work for your application, and they will always, they're not used to talking to people who are outside their field, so they will say stuff without defining it, using some buzzword that I don't know and jargons. Like, you gotta just break that wall. Just forgive me. Let's go slow. And what do you mean by this? I have to ask always that question. And so I think you should really break the wall. Otherwise, you talk and the other person talk and spend 30 minutes and you have no idea what's going on. Right? That's a time, just wasting time. But also, like, you can also ask for some material, like introductory material, to get used to that field. And you can do some of your homework. You don't have to do it perfectly. Just do some of the homework. Try to understand the language that they speak in their field and key terminologies, and you can write down a list of questions and then ask the question directly to your collaborator. And I think doing your homework will really help. And it's been very useful for me.
Well, thank you everyone on the panel. This has been a really good session. Probably better than last year, even though I don't remember what the panel said last year. So for everyone here, there's a session feedback form. This is the same form that will be used for all sessions at ResBaz. And you can see what's going on next at the HackMD. After this, we have 2 4-hour sessions, basically with an hour break in the middle, on Introduction to R and Introduction to Python, which we hope will have many attendees. Again, thank you to the panel. This has been super interesting, and hopefully everyone here found it very valuable. Thank you.